You to present your submission to us.
Sure, thank you, and hi and kia ora. Sorry, I've been running a bit to schedule, so not a great way to get going on something probably as critical as this is. But
it's okay. You've got our full attention
to our farm business. So thank you for that. Great that you received our submission. Just to briefly background for those that do or don't know, I'm a landowner in the upper Waihouse stream, which flows down into Mangoni and onto the Tutaikuri. We have 470 hectares. We've been there for coming up 5 years, so it's our income. I have a family, and we derive our income off the land. So crucially important for us to be able to survive and remain profitable under the proposed rules. We are also, I believe, are considered a priority catchment with high silt loading under the modelling, which I won't question. I think modelling is something we have to use these days to be able to progress. We have, on our farm, we're sheep and beef, traditional sort of sheep and beef operation, 1,500 ewes and 200 to 300 head of cattle, although that's probably been thrown up in the air with the droughts that we've suffered in the last year and and probably almost this year as well.
And I notice you may have a significant or may not have a significant number of feral goats.
We on arrival on the farm, 5 years ago it was in need of an upgrade. The previous owner was 70, so they had, to be fair, done their time. But we'd initiated a goat culling program. We did about 250 goats and consequently fixed all the fences. It hasn't been without significant investment, and it's probably been it's been a struggle to get a bottom line happening for us. We've poured capital in there, thinking that we were going to have some to be able to be rewarded with some nice years going forward. So particularly the rules are or regulation is nervous for us. I come from the Taupō catchment, and we were in the end under regulation there. So this is kind of not a new process for myself. We fortunately in the Taupō catchment had a group called TLC, which was the Lake Taupo catchment group of farmers, and which was essentially a farmer-driven membership, and we represented landowners, and we were able to work with the regional council, perhaps to help influence a little bit of regulation, so that basically farmers in the Taupō catchment weren't going to be brought to their knees under the initial proposal. I think it took quite a while for that proposal to be, enacted in the end. I was encouraged I was encouraged early on with this tank proposal when the regional council did engage with farmers and asked for us to come up with a land use initiative. I thought that was a great positive. We had already been active ourselves in doing things on our farm, and we thought that was an opportunity for us to engage and perhaps help shape what might come out of this whole proposal. I thought the process, thanks to Mary Ann Baker for hearing us, and Peter Kay for help for chairing it. It was at times challenging, but I think we came up with what I consider to be a great great idea, catchment collectives, as a way forward that's involving and collaborative, and I think it has buy-in for farmers, and I think also it's used in other parts of the country, and I'm encouraged by that, and I really do support that initiative. I think it was about an 18-month process. I think in general principle, our farm, Mangano Farm, and I, as a representative, support the plan change. We have probably done a number of initiatives on our own bat that I probably just want to highlight. In terms of pole planting, I have a few slides that may or may not be that clear, but it's in a partnership with, we got funding through the council, but it's not regulation, it's not actual regulation that has driven us to do this.
Mr. Dribich, we've also got those same photos on a screen just in front of us, which is quite clear, much clearer than the one that you see.
Great. I'm pleased about that. Yep. So that one there was it's showing willows that have been planted in a critical source area, and it's just all green grass underneath it, and they've been there for a period of years. So it's just highlighting what farmers, how they perceive their land, protect their land, and want it better. In there's nothing more rewarding than seeing our land in a good state and growing grass, and that's a prime example with willows. They've they're in the wintertime, lost their leaves, but we've got complete grazing underneath that. Just that that is not lost. Whereas prior would have been quite a waterway and erosion prone sort of example. I'm sorry for the rest of you, it's not highlighted greatly. And there was we've got another picture there at all. That's just showing feral deer.
I was going to say, those are very big feral goats.
But it was just, again, it's just highlighting that we have a large QE2 covenant on our property, and so we have fenced all those areas off, all those natural gullies and significant areas. Or I don't want to say that word because significant areas are getting a bit of attention at the moment. But we have fenced off those areas, and we've just enhanced the better contour of our property. So, I think it's fair to say that farmers, and I know neighbours exactly the same, we're conscious, we're the old cliche, we're making it better for the next generation. We've got the Waihouse stream which runs through our property, and that is a complete corridor that's currently fenced. So, and I just want to highlight the fact that that's, that was that's an involuntary that we've done. This gets on further down in my submission, but it's just demonstrating the creek crossings that we are reliant on for access on our property. They're only ankle deep, but in a flood you can get up to where those branches are on those willows. So significant amounts of water can come down there, and equally it can come up in a matter of hours, and it can drop in a matter of hours. So, in terms of bridging or culverts or crossings, probably completely impractical, or a considerable expense that we would have to go quite high to be above any flood zone, and then it becomes whether it's be questionable on the economics. So I guess my submission in respect to stream crossings, we object to them being having to be culverted or bridged, and that we think that a frequency of use is possibly a better system to to cater for situations like ours. We have four stream crossings like that, which are integral to 75% of our farm for access. We have 4 stream crossings like that. So, in fact, that would be the biggest, but they are crucial for us to continue to farm. We have livestock crossing them, but we would on average only cross that creek with livestock probably once a week as a frequency. So I propose that we had a frequency rather than that it was built around that sort of scenario. So yeah, I will continue on with my just my notes in respect to my submission. I think, and I've already highlighted that survivability will be a challenge, and I guess there's other factors going on there at the moment that are beyond everyone's control in terms of climate change. And I'm particularly keen that land use needs to capture flexibility. I just think it needs to capture flexibility in that sense. Just on my, in response to some of the regulations, I have 5 that I've highlighted in terms of what I wish to comment on, which you'll have a copy in your submission. But it was just the Tank 1, Rule 1 was the use of productive land. I support that farmers are provided a permitted activity pathway and are able to continue to farm without requiring a resource consent. As I say, we have voluntarily fenced off all our streams and our natural waterways. So we have no stock apart from the crossings that we must pass through, but they're not farmed. Number 2, Tank 5, land use change. I think these rules are about individual farmer property rights. So they're protecting for future generations, and I think it's intergenerational, and therefore land use must offer some adaptability in regulation. I oppose land use specific nitrogen loss restrictions. Farmers should be able to remain, again, flexible and adaptive to change in circumstances when there's unknown. And I support more flexibility and amendment so that the land use threshold for change is 20 hectares or 20% of the property, whichever is greater, from my understanding. Schedule 29, land use change in nitrogen. I seek that Table 1 in Schedule 29 is deleted and propose that a flat rate per hectare is permitted for nitrogen, per hectare is permitted for nitrogen, irrespective of land use and land use change. Farm viability and flexibility, I believe, would be compromised with N losses below 20. Incidentally, it's not something that I might be, always promote, but we're in excess of 20. But that's from a development point of view that we would expect would come down over time. We have, as I say, we have retired marginal land and created generous large setbacks from the stream. And it would be highly unlikely, in my view, that they would be making its way into the stream system. And I would expect that if the nitrogen levels are dropped to under 13, as proposed, we will need to review the land. We're voluntarily retired. So that is not under QE2, that is land that we have decided is not as productive as other parts of the farm. I think that should be tailored to the catchment and specific to working towards achieving freshwater values. And I understand that our catchment is the priority catchment, so and silt and erosion is the main issue, which we have addressed in that sense. I think there's another picture up there. Please, could I have another picture there of the pole planting? Is there another one? Do you have another one there of poles? Of just what we've done there with pole planting, in terms of erosion. We had spent money 2 years ago on putting poles on what was classified as steep land through land use classification index, and so we've just chosen those areas that are particularly prone. The photo there of the cattle going back one, please, was just highlighting not the cows, but it was more that there's a number of, in the background up on top there, of poplars that have been planted by the previous owner, and I thought it was pertinent to show that ongoing land management and land protection has been ongoing for a long period of time since the land has been farmed. In presenting Jeremy White's submission, I think I commented that a registry or some form of system to recognise what has been retired in the catchment, I think would be valuable information. On Rule 7 on soil disturbance, Condition G and H, cropping and hill country, I thought largely prohibited cultivation and on slope. So that's possibly national policy statement as well, and interpretation issues that at the time I considered direct drilling as a very good option for crops, for regrassing and for new grassing, which doesn't necessarily have to go through a cropping phase. Direct drilling is a very good environmental solution, and it doesn't and it has also actually there's no carbon that's released, so that's a consideration in going forward. Tank 3 and stock access to waterways, I think I've just demonstrated our situation there. 75% of the farm is accessed by stream crossings, and that is integral to our farming system.
Tank 3 is actually recommended to be deleted now, but I think that's in favour of the national regulations instead, which is probably not a very helpful intervention from your point of view.
Okay, maybe I need to upskill, need to find out what that is, yep, rather than boring everyone here, that probably everyone else knows. Yeah, so, I've just expanded out on that. So tank, surface water take, stock water take, on my property, 20 cube would not be sufficient to run 4,000 stock units over the summer months. This amount of stock is the minimum needed for our farm to be economic. So, and I note recommendation to Horizons was 30 cube per day. So, and I'd loathe to see that we have to have a consent for stock water. So I oppose stock water. Consenting for stock water purposes. In the Taupo catchment, I understood that stock water was as of right, and domestic. In concluding, I support the catchment collectives and farmer environmental plans, and I support that they are something that farmers can initiate themselves and formulate themselves. I think the farmers, you get much more buy-in, and the farmer owns the plan. The farmer actually owns the plan and is more inclined to implement it. I support sheep and beef submission, and I also support of the wetland enhancement and investment to landowners. As I said, we have benefited from local and central government funding for land retirement and riparian planting for environmental protection. which has allowed us to remove stock or stock exclusion from waterways. Thank you for giving me the time to present my submission, and yeah, if there's any questions that I might have, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Truebridge. Can I ask, where's your source of stock water supply?
We have an on-farm spring, and that we have a pump system there to two tanks, reservoirs on a hill, and then we gravitate to the rest of the farm. Previously, the farm was all dams and there was no reticulated system. So we had stock and wandering around in creeks and wandering around in dams and wetlands trying to get water. So we basically we have stopped all that happening on our property.
Thank you.
Just at point 3 of your submission, it says that it's highly unlikely the nitrogen will be making its way into the stream system. So it's point 3 and it's headed Schedule 29 Land Use Change Nitrogen.
Yep.
I was just wondering what you based that statement on.
We have large setbacks on our property, and I didn't get a good photo that would highlight that, but we would have any natural waterways have rather than metres, probably hundreds of metres, because we're in gorge systems. So we have, and we're only farming the contours on top. So there's a yeah.
So that's not based on any particular monitoring you've done, or
we haven't done any
comparable
monitoring
somewhere else. That's
no, we haven't done any monitoring.
Observing. Okay. The other one is this is my dumb question. When you're talking about direct drilling, what are you meaning by that?
So cultivation is when you cultivate to put paddocks into crops, or
yes.
you effectively plough it, or you disc it, or you turn the ground up. Whereas
yes.
direct drilling is more a spray, a paddock out with Roundup, and then you put a drill in the ground that makes rows and drops seed in the ground. Right. Yep. So it's much more environmental. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We'll see if we've got any other questions. Right. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
We next have Oanui Station, and I believe we've got Peter Rakis, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, and also Mr. Greg Hono. Thank you. Welcome. Did I pronounce your name correctly? Oh, it's Rakes. Okay, thank you. So we've got your original submission. We've got a nice colour brochure here from Mr. Honor, I understand. And we've got a one-pager, some points of emphasis. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Excellent, thank you. I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks very much for that. Just before I start, how much time have we got now? Because we were in for 11 o'clock, so...
I know you'd scheduled in for...
For an hour. Won't hopefully not take that long, but...
what we currently have for you is, I said we've got about 20 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to have to abbreviate a bit then, won't I?
Yeah. Let's make a start.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for the opportunity today to just go over our submission. This e-tank matter is a very critical matter in terms of our operation. We're farming at Untitled Station, which is a property of 688 hectares, of which 185 are under processed croppings of various types. We support the likes of Heinz Waddies, McCain's, etc., and also lease land to the likes of Bostocks and other people. So we consider that we provide quite a bit of produce for the local area, which supports the economy. in the area. So just to be brief then, as you can see from the initial part of my submission was that the plan needs balance. I was concerned reading through it all that it seemed to be a lot of matters raised which could be used by dissenters to obstruct unnecessarily, and I pointed the Commission to the provisions in the RMA which also include the enabling and the promotion of the use of natural and physical resources to meet the reasonable foreseeable needs of future generations. So all I'm just trying to signal there is that could the plan please be worded carefully so that there is that enabling and constructive side to it. It's pretty obvious, I know, but there's a lot of people. We're living in this day, aren't we? Where people are increasingly becoming concerned about the environment, and I can understand that. But nevertheless, we're all here to make a living, to work together. We can't just shut up shop, and because of the environment, we've got to work with what we've got. So please, can the plan just be worded with that in mind? And I was concerned that there's quite a lot of matters raised in there that could be used prejudicially by persons that are determined to obstruct. Second point I've make is, and this is just a question I put to the Commission, is the RMA is being overhauled dramatically at present, and how will that affect this plan? The RMA has rightly been rewritten because of too much restriction on development and the severe impediment it poses to the national and regional economies. So all I'm asking is, if this plan's put in place and the RMA, as we know, has been scrapped, it's going to be rewritten because it's too hard for people in a lot of cases. Will the plan have to be rewritten too? The next section is provision for Maori cultural concerns. Just one thing I wanted to emphasise here, where you completely respect the rights of Maori interest to make representation about their cultural concerns, about developments, about what's happening in the region. I work with a lot of Maori people and I lease land off them, have good relationships with them. So I'm not against the idea of their concerns being presented. But there's a wording that I felt just stood out, needed changing, from upheld. So if you say that these principles, these cultural concerns will be upheld, my respectful submission is to the Commission that will provide for a prejudicial outcome. But if you say that their cultural concerns will be considered in decision making, that puts them on the same plane as everybody else, which I feel is very important, very critical in this matter. The matter of the wetland construction and riparian plantings along waterways, this is a particular concern. We're affected quite significantly, and I don't think the Regional Council is likely aware of this. The Peka Peka wetland has a significant dam bridgehead put at the end of it, at the northern end of it, which holds water back to keep the water in the wetland, whereas naturally it would drain away. Let's consider the scenario of what occurred 3 years ago. We got 13 inches of rain in a flash flood situation in August. I went and had a look at the wetland and saw water pouring over the top of that stop bank, pouring into the Aonui stream it backed up and flooded our place in down Turamo Road with floods I've never ever seen before in the over 30 years I've been there. Now, I'm not against wetlands, but all I'm saying is that they need to be managed, and it may need to be a high dam put there so that the water will be held and then released slowly. But at the moment, I'm deeply concerned that it's actually causing huge flooding issues in our area. And I just wanted to point the Commission to the obligations of the Drainage Act 1908, and that councils actually can be held liable for negligence. There was, where I first became acquainted with this, was a situation in Northland where there was an avocado grower, a large avocado grower, and he was pressing the Auckland Council because his drainage wasn't good enough and he couldn't get water away from his property. They objected and refused to do it. Finally, he had to get his legal counsel, and they went through the Drainage Act, and there's specific provisions in there that provide clear obligations to councils to provide adequate drainage, and if they're negligent, they can be held liable for compensation. So in other words, if what I'm saying is that it's all very well to plant up the Karamu stream, the Awanu stream with nice native plants along the side, which is, could be aesthetically nice, etc., etc. But if the diggers can't get in and keep the drains clear, and our place gets flooded, well, there are obligations there. I just signal it to it, and I'm suggesting to the council that they thoroughly and exhaustively assess the implications of this, because it is a reality in the law that dates right back to 1908. And also talking to Mr. Dave Paku, who runs the drain cleaning process in Hiratonga Plains, he said to me, look, they want all these plants down the waterways, but he said, I want to get my digger in there to keep the drains flowing. How's that going to work? So we're just trying to be practical, and I just really signal that as an important point, that there are legal obligations on the regional council to keep the drains adequate and get the water off our land. And if they don't, well, it could be repercussions. No one likes to talk like that. People wouldn't want to go that way, but there are obligations. Then we get on to the matter of groundwater abstraction and water allocation. So I just wanted to point out the situation we're in at Awanui Station. So progressively over time we've developed the property and put in one 12-inch bore and two 8-inch bores to irrigate all our land. We had to go through a very comprehensive consent process for that. I'd just like to... This here is a 36-page report that I had done by Susan Rabbit of environmental principal geologist, hydrologist that was relied on a lot by the council, and the report was reviewed by Mr. Jason Strong, who was a principal environmental scientist. Now at that time, applying for the consent, engaged Mr. Honour to come out, and we did a 4-day pump test. We had to monitor all the neighbouring bores. She had to do a very comprehensive analysis of the water system in our area. So all the science was done, and I got a bill all after about $45,000 to do it. So what I'm saying is that we've proved, and the council accepted, that our water take which incidentally I've been told is one of the larger water takes on the Heretaunga Plains, was not causing less than minor effects. Now the council are now talking about possibility of reducing our allocation, and I'm saying, surely, I've paid for all this science to be done. We're right on the edge of the aquifer. The Awanui station is right on the edge. It's at Pakipak and to the river and beyond. Everybody else gets the water before us. Thousands and thousands of wells. We never run out of water. Of course, the ground level goes down at times, but we never ran out of water. There's a very abundant resource there, and I think it's more extensive and more abundant than the scientists, I respectfully suggest, may understand. I know that sounds like a big call, but practically I can say that, and Mr. Honour will give evidence afterwards to elaborate on that. So that's just the point, just in summary, there it is that we've gone to all this at the council's behest to conduct a very extensive analysis. Please understand that we won't be very happy if the allocation is reduced. We have to have an allocation in terms of our litres per second, which I think is 110 litres a second, which we can use at times, but we have an allocation of a total volume for the season. But that we may not use that unless there's very, very severe drought. So if we get it taken off us, what's going to happen in those drought periods? Do I just let my crops fail? What's going to happen? It's just not practical. Just one or two other points I just wanted to go over there. As I said, Mr. Honour will go over the more extensively our feelings about the actual aquifer situation, where I go over that. In spite of all the massive, there is a large abstraction of water, and I totally agree, but I believe that a moratorium is actually not appropriate, given the fact that anybody that puts a bore down has to go through that extensive process, as we did. So they can't draw the water until they find out how it's affecting their neighbours. And there are some water-short areas, I acknowledge. But as Mr. Honour will explain, there's a lot of areas that are not water short, and there's room there for more bores. So, and then going on to the needs of future generations. So I'm saying that there's probably well over 1,000 hectares of land still on the Heretaunga Plains. There's the Fernie block, there's block owned by Coopers, large blocks of Maori land as well, and I've been told there's over 600 hectares of prime Maori land that now can't get a consent to put a bore down. Well, that's not fair on them. They want to provide for their needs of their future generations, and I think that it needs reviewing, that the proper processes are in place. If the water's there, they should be able to take it. Finally, and this is probably a critical part of my submission, there is a practical solution available to resolve all concerns, and that is water storage with release to rivers during times of low flow. So let's just be practical. The water runs down the rivers during the winter, big floods, roars out to sea. The government will probably help us with funding, particularly in the frame of mind they're in about protecting the rivers. And why not? Just put some dams in. There's already some dams being mooted, which is a great idea. We just need some more. We just need a bit of money. Put the dams in, take the water in, release it into the rivers during the times of low flow, and you're going to be replenishing the aquifer. Why put a handbrake on the whole Hiratonga Plains economy when there's a solution? And it's a practical solution. All it needs is a bit of money.
Thank you, Mr. Oakes. We'd like to see if we have some questions for you. I had a couple of comments. This relates both to your submission, your summary today, and also to your original submission. In terms of the Resource Management Act and its intended replacements, my current understanding is there's going to be at least 3 pieces of legislation that replace the current legislation. An exposure draft this year, the legislation, if acceptable, enacted next year, with a significant amount of transitional arrangements. So this plan change is very likely to continue, and a decision will be made within that time frame before a new act is put in place, as well as any likely transitional arrangements in any case. So that it's business as usual for the next wee while.
Okay.
Just in regards to your matters that you raised in your original submission in regards to Objective 2, and I'm thinking you're meaning Te Mana Te Wai and Ki Uta Kitai, and you were looking for some word changes. I'll just point you to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. It's quite directive to regional councils that the council must give effect to Te Mana Te Wai, and it must adopt an integrated approach to Ki Uta Kitai. So the regional council doesn't have a lot of discretion in terms of the interpretation of what's meant by that. So that's in my view, that's why you'll see the strong language of the recognition of those particular cultural values included in the plan change, because the National Policy Statement is directing the council to do that. So I just wanted to point those couple of matters out and then open it up for questions.
Your 3 bores, I think you said you had, with a combined take of 110 litres a second. Are they monitored? And
Yes.
so how long back do your records go?
Well, it's only been monitored by telemetry for, I think, the last 2 years, but we've got records, the council's got records which we supplied, I would say, for 5 years before that, or at least.
So 7 years in total of record.
Yeah, it could be closer to 10. Yeah.
Just curious in relation to the actual and reasonable sort of test, and whether your records would be regarded as accurate or not.
Well, we've got meters on the bores, and before the telemetry was put in, which is automatically transmitted to the council, we had to manually check the bores and send in the readings. It was part of the conditions of the consent.
Are the groundwater levels in your area monitored as well? The actual level of the groundwater?
I'm not aware of it. But all I can say is that it's remarkable the recovery we get. And we can be pumping with those 3 bores, and we've got large irrigators, pivot irrigators, 3 pivot irrigators plus hard hose machines. And it's remarkable, even when there's real, water pressure on, there's a drought. And when you stop, they recover, which is remarkable when you think of we're right on the edge of the aquifer. And that's why I find it a bit hard to understand, why there's so much panic amongst the council, and particularly when you go to Clive as well, which is right at the edge, and the water's still the wells there maintain a positive head, even when there's massive pumping pressure upstream in the middle of a most terrible Hawke's Bay drought. And the water also runs out to sea from underground scripts. So all I'm saying is that there's a massive resource that's been put there by a creator, and I think it's underestimated.
How close are your neighbours' bores to yours?
quite close. There's one, and very interestingly enough, there's one bore just over the drain from us, which is about 80 metres away, and that is a domestic supply, and it has, it's got a very poor suction system, which means that the pump is about 50 metres away from the bore, and they never lose their water. But as I said, we had to monitor all these bores, 5 bores of my neighbours, and do comprehensive tests to prove that we weren't having an effect. So all the science has been done.
Thank you.
Could I just ask the Commissioner, in terms of the directions of the regard for the Maori cultural interests, I mean, the concern I have, and I've been through this, and I've just got to be very sensitive what I say, but we've got a property to the Aquifer station where there's a wind farm proceeding. Now, there was opposition by Maori cultural interests. And I know they've got their views and they need to be respected. But the issue we had there was that some of the cultural matters they raised, I personally didn't believe in them.
I don't know why that's...
And basically,
No, sorry.
all I'm saying is that...
Sorry, Mr. Riker, I don't know why those are pertinent to us, because we're dealing with Plan Change 9.
Yeah.
We're not dealing with wind farms.
No.
And the Act and the National Policy Statement are quite clear. And I was trying to make a point in regards to your submission points that you've raised, which you're most welcome to raise, but that's the current statutory environment in which we work with.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. The point I'm trying to make is that if there's got to be provision for all views to be taken into account, and that should be notated in the plan as well.
well, I think we can agree to that. That's
Yeah.
why we have hearings and a democratic processes to hear everyone's perspective. And we also have laws that apply to everybody equally, and that we do our best to make sure that they're being implemented correctly.
Yeah, and I'll accept that, and I emphasise, as I said before, that I know that they've got their right to have their say, and I respect that.
Yeah. Well, I'm more interested in what your submission is rather than what other people's submissions were or have been in other circumstances. So we'll move on to seeing if there's any more questions. Otherwise, we'll hear from Mr. Honu. Thank you, Mr. Honu. We've got your... I don't want to make a big scene about it. This is the first time we've received a colour. Everything else has been black and white, rather bland.
Try and pretty good job of
But
it.
maybe perhaps just take us through what you're providing to us.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you for allowing us to speak this morning. Look, Peter's asked me to come along in support of getting an understanding of the aquifer system that we have here. In our accompanying documents and that, I've got the small agenda which I'll go through it very briefly because I guess we're time limited. The second part of what you're seeing in the brochure there is the regional council monitor wells that they have across the province. I've picked out a few of them that they try and best demonstrate the marvellous ability for the aquifer to recover when the water is taken out of it. I've been involved in the industry for over 50 years and we've drilled in a lot of areas. It'd be fair to say that what we have under the Hiratonga Plains here is probably one of the best aquifer systems, certainly in New Zealand. And the main feed is reliant from water that's introduced via the Narrowra River. Not here really to give you a bit of a history lesson or too much on stuff, but you probably already know a few things about where the water may come from, but the key thing is that there is a large body of water under there. Over the last 20 odd years, we've taken more notice as to what's been happening with summer low static water levels. It'd be fair to say that they have dropped the last couple of summers, more so than they have been known to be dropped before. But it's in the charts that you see there, it's got the ability to recover in the winter time. So it's really just a matter of managing how much water we can take out of it in respect to how it's affecting the streams nearby. We take our job in the drilling side of it seriously from the fact that we do not want to have any problems with extracting too much water, because it just causes ourselves and our clients a lot of grief. So when we produce a well, we spend a lot of time getting the efficiencies up to make economical extraction. We also go to a lot of trouble to test the wells to prove that the water is there, and also to mitigate any major effects on neighbouring wells. So we have a fairly good regime in Hawke's Bay for ensuring that there's enough water there for all to share. There are a few areas certainly that are starting to become, I suppose you'd say, at the extremes of how much you'd want to extract from within the particular zone, but in primarily the Bridge Par area is being denoted as being a bit of a problem area, and we've noticed that for the last 15 odd years, where we've seen water flows drop there, and it's a little bit unknown as to why that's happening. There are fault lines that come through Hawke's Bay, and the fault lines need to be recognised for their effect on what's happening in the aquifer. And certainly Bridge Par back up to Maraikakaho, there's a division through there where the water's not coming through, but we'd like to think it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario, because how you treat what happens at Bridge Par should be sectioned off as to what we could do at Twyford or across the rest of the Heretaunga Plains right out to the sea. There is, like I say, there's a tremendous amount of water to be had under there, and we're not seeing any major drop-off in flow rates, and you know, a lot of people get concerned about too much water being taken out. As I say, it recharges itself pretty well, so it's a matter of managing how low we're prepared to let the aquifer go in the middle of a dry summer. So we'd like to think that somewhere along the line through the progress of the whole province, you know, the cities are going to grow. There's going to be a lot more water required for town as much as there is for the rural community, and it's a matter of how that's going to be addressed as well, because somewhere along the line some compromises are going to have to be made, and it's not easy, but I'm sure there'll be some good data that'll come through in the next few years as to how we can manage that. We get involved in quite a few exploration drilling programs where we drill deeper, and there's always the thought, oh, well, just keep going deeper, you'll find some new water. To date, you know, these wells have been drilled down to 300 metres in the Heretaunga Plains. It'd be fair to say that the best water is between 50 and 100 metres. As you go deeper, the flow rates drop off and the water quality deteriorates, so therefore it's not necessarily a matter of fact of going deeper.
When you say the best water, you're meaning it's got good pressure, it's good quality? Or?
Well, first of all, if you're looking like town supply, for example, we're looking at water that's got low iron and low manganese. As you're probably aware, that the cities have had problems addressing getting good quality water for that. And also the growers also like to have, you know, quite good water so they don't have iron issues through the irrigation systems. But the water for example, anything below 150 metres has higher iron and manganese levels, plus the transmissivity of the gravels does not let the water flow as fast through the aquifers, therefore they're not as productive. We drill in a lot of areas, like Central Hawke's Bay is a totally different issue. I don't want to bring that into here, but we are always looking for new avenues to see if we can try and introduce, more water, but, down there it hasn't really been fully explored yet, whereas on the Hiratonga Plains they've done some pretty good deep work, and the assumption is that what we've got now is what we have to manage the best way we possibly can. For that matter, we work in a lot of other areas. Like we do a lot of work up and around, Wakatani, back through to Rotorua, Taupo, and you certainly know how good our aquifer system is compared to those other ones that we work in up there. And one thing I must say, over the years too, our regional council have been pretty proactive in giving us some firm instructions as to how wells are to be drilled, from the point of view that a lot of the artesians that we deal with, we have to make sure we don't get any leakage, and we very much want to preserve that, because there's some of the streams and tributaries, or a lot of them are actually from direct leakage from within the aquifer system, which then is very much closely linked. So we certainly don't want to have any rogue bores on our hands, so it's very important that that's maintained. One thing, I started doing a bit of research prior to coming to the meeting here, and we start to just pay a bit more attention as to what's happening regarding the water levels and how it's monitored through, in particular in the Hiratonga Plains here. And you start looking at some of the monitor wells the Regional Council have and the data we've got, and sadly the program only goes back to 2009. You'll see those graphs that, we've got that 11 years, 12 years of data. I know there's wells that have been drilled way before that, and I'm not sure where that data is, but what we're seeing in that 11 or 12 years is the fact that on average we're seeing about 2 to 3 metres of fluctuation between the summer highs and the winter lows. So we're sort of pretty confident the fact that we're going to be seeing rechargeability from the rivers that is will enable the aquifer to be sustainable. It's not as if you're mining water and you're not going to be able to recharge again, so that's a good thing. When we drill new wells, we have quite a testing regime for two reasons. One's to prove how much flow there is coming in, and the other critical thing is to monitor neighbouring wells, and we sometimes radiate out between 1 and 2 kilometres away from the pump tested wells to ensure that the neighbouring wells are not affected and that they have a less than minor effect. If we drill a well in Twyford and we're pumping it even up to 100 litres a second, there could be a well that's 100 metres away, and to be lucky if it gets affected by 50 mil, because the transmissivity is so good out there that you just do not have a problem. I suppose in conclusion, Regional Council, we have some good direction from them at times, but one thing I'd like to think, and I've seen over the years, that there's decisions that have been made that, how do I put it? We have a raft of different people come in over a period of say 3 to 5 years. They come with different thinking. They'll make policy changes, and then we have to gear up to get an understanding of what they're trying to achieve. And it would be nice to have some dialogue and better collaboration in order to work with some of the decisions that are being made, and it might be beneficial to both parties. And I'm really just talking with respect to drilling wells and what we're trying to achieve for our clients.
Can you go with that monitor, Maclay's board?
Yeah, the recharge well you're talking about, yeah. Well, of course, one of the important things for the Twyford area as such, which is nowhere near where Peter's place is, they put the recharge well, in which you guys are probably quite aware of the idea of that, and it's a very good experiment. We were asked to put this well in that'll produce 100 litres a second free flow, which it does.
Right by the river.
And then always sort of wondered why you'd put a well in and then just turn it on and fill the drain up when you're taking all the water out of the aquifer to keep the stream, or the drain that we're feeding into to keep the stream going. It just didn't really quite sit well with us because I don't like wasting water. But there's a good reason why that was done, and if it can allow the health of the stream to be maintained and also allow the irrigators to use the water underground, well, it could be a good solution. Having said that, like I said, it seems quite wasteful of water when it's deemed to be precious. And a lot of the streams that we're seeing, I guess, is an evolution of significant leakage from the aquifer system right from the early 1900s, and these streams have been formed, or the drain, as such, Relpri drain, has been formed to get rid of all the leakage of the water, and of course it's now become significant in its own right because of the natural habitat that it has. So yeah, it's a minefield as to how you come up with the best solution, but all I can say is from our perspective, from drilling wells, that there's no problem with the volume that we can get out. It's just the effects that everybody can live with accordingly. Not sure whether it's been helpful in understanding the resource that you have underneath you or not, but
Thanks, Mr.
probably not too much more than we can
We've
add.
got significant amounts of information regards a lot of the science, the hydrology
Yep.
of the groundwater, etc. But it's always good to hear observations of people who are working in the field.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. So see if there's any questions.
Yes, thank you. The 5 well data blocks you've supplied us with, what in your little handout, what's the key? There's a couple of things I want to ask about them. What's the key message you want us to take home from those? And I also want to make sure I'm interpreting the plots that go with them correctly.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you can perhaps use one as an example. Bearing
Okay.
in mind I'm colourblind,
Right.
and just want to make sure I've got some of the shading interpreted correctly.
You have to ask the regional council about the shady bits, because I don't really know what that is, but
Well, let's just take what I think is the
The
blue
D.
line. That's the groundwater level
Yep.
over time. And I think most of them started about 2009, 10,
so
up until...
let's work on well 1674, which is probably right in the heart of the Twyford area. It gives a pretty good overview. The well is 38 metres deep. Okay, so this is in the Artesian aquifer system, and if you're looking at the graph there, say, you'll see the highest point in 2010, July 2010,
Yes.
water level's 5.2 metres. It's a positive head of 5.2 metres above ground level. Okay, so then in the height of the dry summer, and look at the extremes, and let's go down to, say, January 17, where the graph drops to the lowest, it's 2.5.
Yes.
So you're seeing a variation, a fluctuation of water levels of, 2.75 metres. Okay, so the key thing back to that though is look to the recovery, where it comes back within a couple of months, 3 months, it's back up to almost the original level it was before the summer. And this is normal. you know.
Yes, so those peaks, those annual peaks, that they're occurring at what time of the year? Late winter or something like that, are they?
Well, if you look at the bottom down there, it says January 17, for example. You look at the bottom.
So
line
that's
there,
that's the
underneath there.
trough. That's the trough, that's
Yes,
its
yeah,
lowest level.
that's the lowest the well
And the,
gets to,
and
which
the
is
highest levels
still-
are in
Yep.
winter, sort of.
So it's got 2.5 metres positive head still in the middle of summer, and in the height of the winter, the positive head goes to, let's say, 4.75 odd metres.
So so I've had a quick look at all 5 of those plots, and the one thing that I was getting out of it is that for all of them, since 2010, those annual peaks in water level look to be declining over time.
It's a
Would
good
that be a fair
observation.
comment?
Yeah,
Yes.
because we've had severe dry winters in comparison to what we've had before, and that's,
It looks to be quite a consistent trend though, doesn't it, over a decade for all of those wells?
yeah, there's more science yet to be had. It'd be really neat actually to have even more data going back further, which I'm sure it's there, but in the time that I had to prepare for this, I wasn't able to capture that. But what can happen, and we've experienced it, it can be dry here on the Hiratonga Plains, and it can rain in the ranges. The river comes up and it floods, and our water levels will be up 0.5 metre to 1 metre within a day. It happens that quick, because I've experienced it being on a drilling rig, and we've had water levels when we're drilling the wells, the water levels down about 1 metre below ground level, poured down with rain overnight, come back the next day, and the water level was artesianing, which then causes us problems when we're drilling the well at the time. So it shows you how quick the water levels can come back. Okay, so we're not seeing the rains that we've had in the past, and when they do come, the graph will change, it'll come back up again. And it pretty much really supports the fact that storage has got to be the next best option that the province has got to look at, and it'd be fantastic if, in the short future, that something does happen in the way of storage up in the ranges, or up in the upper reaches of the Aurora, because that is the main feed for the whole aquifer system. It doesn't have to rain here on the plains for that to happen. Obviously, up in the ranges is where the rainfall is captured. And the beauty about a particular storage system that we would have in Hawke's Bay is from up at Whanawhana down towards Roy's Hill. Any water that's let down the river would not be lost as it's coming down the river, apart from anyone that's irrigating off it, because it has a natural clay pan in there, and it just doesn't keep percolating down. It's got a papa surface which is fairly well documented out there, and about just above Roy's Hill is where the papa surface drops, so therefore any water coming down is still effectively what's released up the top will at least get to Roy's Hill, and then it gets between Roy's Hill and Fern Hill, and there's a massive drop of water flow, which is that water that's going into our underground aquifer.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Thank you, Mr. Homer.
Thank you.
Were you also going to make the comment that bore that you were speaking about, that monitoring bore that's right beside the river at Twyford, even in the severest drought, and when there's tremendous pumping pressure, it still retains a positive heat, is that right?
Yep, yeah, it's still at a
So-
2.5 metre positive heat.
Which,
Thank you. We've got Mr. Bruce McGregor. Am I reading that right? Here we go. Ah. Oh, no, that's not it.
Eh?
Bruce, the group here has withdrawn, and we've now got Bailey Produce.
Okay,
Bruce
That's
was
all right.
really gonna turn me up.
yeah. Yeah, and Graham Gleeson's coming in. So we've got Bailey.
So we can get rid of Bruce.
Doing some administration, working out where we're at. And so I'm really hoping that your Bailey Produce and Kevin Bailey and Kate Shefford. Welcome. Just give us half a minute.
Hang
We'll
on,
just
I've
bring
gotta
up your
find it. Oh, here
original
we go.
submission.
That would be the one I don't have open on the screen.
Here it is. There it is. Okay. Apologies for that little hiccup. Yes, so welcome and happy for you to introduce yourselves and present your submission.
Thank you. My name's Kate Shefford. I guess at the time of writing this submission, I was working for Bailey Produce. So it's probably only fair that I talk to some of the points now.
I take it from that introduction you're no longer?
No, but transition between jobs. So, and beside me is Kevin Bailey, who is the owner and operator of Bailey Produce. So I might just start off with giving a bit of background and context to Bailey Produce, and then we'll maybe get into some of the points that we've made. So I take it you've sort of looked through the submission, and I can just talk to a few points, key
We've
points.
read the submissions, but
Yeah.
you'll understand there's
Quite a few.
there's a large number of them. There's almost 2,000 pages of evidence, so we might not recall every single thing that you said. So happy for you to pick
No,
out the
forgive
main
you.
points for us.
Bailey Produce, it's a family-owned and operated business, and it's been operational for 30 years. And occupying, I've got 280 hectares there, but it's about 300 hectares of sort of prime horticultural land in Twyford, and outskirt Hastings. And Bailey Produce, I guess there's quite a diverse range of crops as far as nectarines, peaches, plums, apples. Apples is the only export crop, is that right? Melons, beans, peas, pumpkins, so strawberry, sweet corn, so good. A pretty
Quite a
diverse
diversity of
operation.
vegetables.
And much of that is supplied locally to the local market, so
And just the apples are the export?
yeah. So, fruit shop, the fruit shop on Pakawai Road. And then also, I guess quite a significant part of the domestic market as well. As far as employment, about 27 permanent workers throughout the year, 38 seasonal workers, and over the busy periods, 150 RSE workers. I guess employment's extremely valuable to Bailey Produce, and I guess as far as skills and training for those workers too. I guess as far as the long-term vision for the company is to sort of continue with that high-quality produce, and with that often comes, more purchasing of land across sort of Twyford and Heratonga, and so I guess, there's been, there's certainly a few key points to raise around how that will limit what Bailey Produce, as far as expanding their operation and diversity. So I guess as far as, was there anything you wanted to add? As far as the plan change as a whole, so pretty supportive of Plan Change 9. Acknowledge the work and commitment of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and the number of years it's taken to produce this plan, which, demonstrates the number of perceived issues and values across the region, and the complexities and, no doubt the reason why there's been such a significant number of submissions over the last few days.
How has Bailey Produce been involved in proposed Plan Change 9? Were you involved with the stakeholder group at all, or you had a connection to the stakeholder group? Or?
Yeah, a connection, and I guess indirectly through the Twyford Irrigators Group as well, so pretty informed with a lot of the policy changes and proposed changes in the plan change. I guess as far as, there's only really 3 key talking points, I guess, that are most relevant to Bailey Produce, and I'm guessing I don't have to just go in numerical order. I can just sort of fire away with anything.
We can manage it, yeah.
So I might talk firstly to Policy 46, which is around water use and allocation, and the main heading of that, surface water flow management. So I guess the key things here that stood out for us is, it talks about, firstly, C, encouraging and supporting flexible management of water by permit holders so that the allocatable water can be used efficiently and within supplied or specified limits. So I'll probably talk to this a little bit later on, but I see that it's quite contradictory to Policy 48, which is around water use, change and transfer. But I think it's pretty pivotal for what Bailey Produce do as far as purchasing land, and there's going to be times where apples are being pulled out because there's new innovative varieties and crops, and given the diversity of the number of cropping types, seasonal rotations and everything. And so with that, given that it's quite clear there's no new water or consented water available, I think it just places greater emphasis on the ability to be able to move that water around. And I'm not talking across the entire catchment, I'm just talking about where you've got neighbouring parcels of land, and it's clear the effects, well, again, I'll get to this as far as being able to prove that in the information and supporting evidence required, but I think there's just quite a limit, or what the plan change sort of proposes is that transferability is going to be limited unless there's new information or, So I think with that it talks about encouraging and supporting flexible management, but it just doesn't seem like that's the case. And the other thing with D, 46D, is the ongoing data collection and monitoring of water resources and water use to better understand patterns of water availability and water use, and further develop efficient and effective water management provisions. I think we're at a stage now where everybody's pretty on board with monitoring and, you know, particularly of water use and water meters and the regulations that came in 2010 around measuring takes over 5 litres a second and the rollout of that. And I think Hawke's Bay's a pretty good example of that being managed quite well. I think the comment that we wanted to make in regards to this is that there needs to be real emphasis on what's done with that data and that it's used in an effective and meaningful way and that it's transparently reported from the council to the public and to consent holders, because the main thing really is the cost. You know, it's such a huge cost, and hopefully this goes down as it kind of is rolled out and there's more and more technology around it. But the reality is, you know, there's an ongoing monitoring charge every month associated with every metre. And, you know, for Bailey Produce, that's about upwards of $10,000 a year. That's just monitoring charges to send the data to the council. And that's not even looking at the hardware, so that's you know, the cost of the actual water meter and infrastructure to go in, which is, you know, thousands as far as per water take. And I think in your case, Kevin, there's probably, I don't know, how many water meters would you have?
10.
More than 10. A lot. And yeah, so I guess it's just, yeah, we'd just like to see sort of that data being put to better use, and I think it will, but the reality is there's probably limited resource to being able to deal with that at the moment. And I think this is probably highlighted in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater as well. And yeah, this kind of flows on to the next point around water use change and transfer, so Policy 48. So that's around considering the application to change the water use specified by a water permit or to transfer a point of take to another point of take. And with that, it talks about, where is it? Declining applications for transfers of water use. So I think more generally, like I say, it really limits that ability to be changing crop types, and it's quite a burden to have to go through the process of providing, you know, information to support that change. So an example, I mean, it talks about, I think, yeah, 48B, it says new information. So basically they would decline the application where the transfer is to another water quantity area unless new information provides accurate specification of applicable zone boundaries. And with that, it's a little unclear to me whether the new information is information like scientific data that's from the regional council, or whether that's new information that needs to be provided by the consent holder, by the landowner. But I think if it's from the landowner, then, you know, that's another that's another burden as far as cost. And I guess just as an example, and you might see in the submission that, and it's kind of similar to the previous submitter, sounds like Peter Rakes, around having to undergo well tests. So in this case, there was a water take on, is it Jarvis Road? Pardon?
Jarvis and Hill Road.
Yeah, so Jarvis and Hill Road, where basically it was put on ban because it was tied to the Ngāraroa, is that right? Yeah. And as far as the crops that Kevin had in there, it was pretty critical that he was able to irrigate those throughout the dry period, and as soon as it went on band, obviously the inability to do that. And so I guess, yeah, it just really shows the cost and the burden to the consent holder to have to prove otherwise. So Kevin underdid a series of pump tests, and that cost was around $100,000 for this particular well. And this was to prove that there wasn't an effect or basically a connection to the Ngāruroa as far as having an influence on that. And yeah, I think in the end they found that it wasn't, after the number of tests that were done and the reports that were then put to the regional council. So now he has the ability to be able to irrigate when it goes on ban because because of the report that he got done to basically show that there wasn't a hydrological connection. So, I mean, that's just an example of, how high the cost can get to prove that, you know, he can irrigate when he thinks he can irrigate and continue as he was. So I just think that's really unsustainable, and I hope that in some cases they will look at a consent in a situation and the council can sort of assess it on its merits and assess it on, I guess, without having to go through such a hefty process. Anything to add? And hang on, I just want to check. Yeah, so the last point's around policy 21, so around limiting land use change. So this one, it's specifically 21D, so avoid land use change that will result in increased nitrogen loss that contributes to water quality objectives and targets in Schedule 26 for dissolved nitrogen not being met. So I guess our concern is about the wording and the use of avoid, and, you know, again, how this limits any future and further land use change across the tank catchment. And I think the trigger, and there were I think quite a few other submissions that sort of touched on this as well, but in assessing that should be instead in relation to good management practice, as opposed to putting a hard figure on nitrogen, a nitrogen limit, and especially if that's kind of not accurately understood or can be measured. And looking at one of the technical memos that was put out by the Hawkesbury Regional Council, Appendix 8, it touches on the challenges in using models to identify the thresholds of N-loss, and, when that threshold has been crossed. So I think there's just a lot of uncertainty around that, and instead the focus should be on, general good management practice and, any kind of farm environment plans that are done at an individual scale, at a landowner level, where they can manage that themselves. And I just feel like that's already sort of covered in that policy, or that management that's kind of being rolled out at the moment. I guess just the emphasis on a collective management approach with that as well. And it just goes back to, the opportunities for land use and diversification, and, having to be consented around that or limited to what you can do, when I'm not sure how that number or how that nitrogen can be accurately measured in the first place. So that was really it on that point. But I think, generally supportive of all of the objectives of Plan Change 9. and in particular the collective management approach, which I think there's been a lot of submission points on. And yeah, we also support the implementation of, I guess, farm environment plans, because that can again be at an individual landowner level where they understand their farm, they understand their operation, and they know their limits. And you know, that's something that's being again rolled out with the council at the moment. So all of those measures which are in relation to the land use, you know, what they're doing, and yeah, and I guess they're the ones to know that best, right? So I think there's already enough kind of regulation that's driving all that work. So yeah, that was it.
Thank you. I didn't have any specific questions for you, Mrs. Jew, with regards to the submission, but I was just wondering if you could just clarify for me, what was your role with Bailey's Produce?
So it was kind of in a consulting capacity.
Okay.
So I just came in, and it was really to help work through all of their water consents, tidy it up. Yeah, and I guess it was just to, yeah.
What's your professional background?
So I started in local government, so I was with the regional council, and that was in a water management role. Yeah, so I understand it pretty well from a regulatory point of view. Background also coming off a farm, so sort of understand and appreciate the ins and outs of a farming operation. And yeah, I guess, yeah, local government and now in a central government role.
Okay. It sounds like you might be able to do a consultancy in farm environmental management plans.
We'll see. Not at the moment.
She wants to go overseas.
Oh, okay. Well, you
Yeah.
can't do that at the moment.
Yeah.
You have to stay here. Okay. We'll see if we've got any questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Is Bailey Produce a member of the Twyford Water Group?
Yes.
So you have a collective approach to the management of the water resource.
Yes.
Does that work well from your perspective?
Yes, it does. And that should be sort of probably outrolled all around Hawke's Bay too.
Sure.
If I sort of say about water consents, you know, some landowners don't have any consent, and it's historical that, you know, that land was either grazed or a horse paddock, or, you know, they didn't have a consent with the regional council. So there's still quite a bit of land that is unconsented, as the previous submitter said. But with, you know, the being able to transfer consents to other blocks, I don't think we should be limited in not being able to transfer consents.
We didn't have any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got Alexander McPhee. Let's double check. We've got Alexander McPhee next. Yes. Submission 116.
On. Good afternoon, and thank you for the chance of speaking to my submission. Plan Change 9, of course, is concerned with the whole tank catchment, and my submission really only concerns what is relevant to my situation. I do not have the knowledge to commit constructively on all the other aspects of the document. My submission, of course, is based on the original document notified May the 2nd, 2020. I understand there's been new documents released with significant changes, but as a practicing farmer that's pretty busy, I have not got the time to keep abreast of all those changes.
That's understood.
So I thought the general theme of my comments is still relevant.
Thank you.
My submission relates to my little corner of the catchment. It's my thoughts, but I would like to think that it represents the ideals of others as well. And with my family being in the area since the 1880s, always involved with the land, we're pretty familiar with the area as such. We've been farming Mason Ridge since the early 1900s. Now the sixth generation of that family's growing up on the property. 700 hectares of easy to medium limestone hill country. We've got 2 streams through the farm, the Wai to the west and the larger Morakakaho River through the centre. So we've been breeding fattening enterprise for all those times. Successive generations have approached their tenure of the land as being the current guardians. That's the way we look at it. And it's also the aim that we pass on that land to the next generation in as good or if not better condition than when we started there. And it's a fact that successful long-term farming, even dealing with droughts and everything else, relies on treating both one's land and stock with care and respect. And I feel our family has adhered to those principles over the years. There have, of course, been changes over time. There's new ideas, new resources, and as we've become aware of these, we take them into our management practice and improve things as we can where necessary. It's a long, involved process. It takes time and it's expensive. So my interest in the future quality of the land and the water in both our property and the Hawke's Bay area led me to become involved in the tank process 2 or 3 years ago. I'd like to credit those with the initiative of setting up the Farmer Reference Group, with Peter Kay in particular. I was very impressed by the response from the farmers that were asked to go onto that group and their attitude and their input, and which was all very good to see. And I'd also like to support both Beef and Lamb and the Regional Council who got involved in that group as well. We acknowledge that there's a need for Hawke's Bay Regional Council to put in place a policy to enable it to fulfil its obligations regarding central government directives. We understand they've got to be intended to, but we need to do it once and we need to do it right. I also acknowledge that the area within the tank catchment is a group of people and organisations, all with their aim to look after their own interests. And that's very understandable, but how we work together is the actual crux of this issue. So to go on to the actual rules and whatever that are in the document, and I'll refer to some of them and make comment. The tanks, rules 1 and 2, use of productive land, is something that I strongly support the rules as they're written. Rule 3 regards a timing issue.
Rule 3 no longer exists. Well, it's been struck out of the draft plan.
Okay, so no need to comment. Very good. Rules 5 and 6 regard changing land use. There's some contradictory figures there, and I think that also with the newer documents they've been changed, but we talk about 10% of the property or 10 hectares or whatever, and I think that whole rule needs to be looked at again as to the areas that are referred to with any change in land use. Tank Rule 7, surface water take. My first question here is what constitutes a property? Because we talk about an allowance per property. Now, a property can be from 1,000 square metres to 1,000 hectares. So any talk there needs looking at. The talk was 5 cubic metres per day for one property. At the moment, I believe we are allowed to use 20 cubic metres per day for stock and domestic water. So on a 700 hectare property such as ours, 7,000 stock units that on a hot day in the middle of the summer might be requiring 10 litres per stock unit. We could be using up to 70 cubic metres in a day. Add to that our property also supplies another farm of 150 hectares, plus another 8 or 10 lifestyle blocks. The take from at that one spring can be quite large on a very hot summer's day. How do we do this? Really, in my mind, there should be no limit on the amount of water that can be reasonably taken for both stock water and domestic use. In addition to that, I felt I needed to comment on water for irrigation purposes. So our current policy for water use really is directed that we have to ensure that the water that leaves our property is is pure and not full of contaminants and there to go into the aquifer so that it can be used further down the river for firstly commercial purposes. I don't feel it's right that Maraikako stream that flows through our property, we have a number of large springs on the property that add to the flow of that as they go through, plus quite a number of seepages on the sides of the hills where water really doesn't even get to the stream. It forms bog holes and damp areas that are not really a wetland area, they're stuck on the side of a limestone ridge. So why we shouldn't be able to use some of that water for our irrigation purposes, we're not talking about 100 litres a second, we're probably talking about 1 litre or 2 litres per second, absolutely maximum. And I feel that we should be able to use some of that for our use to irrigate a small area of land to help us in a dry situation. As well as that, there's the recreational properties of that water. So we're supposed to have it nice and clean so that people can swim in it and canoe in it and whatever down below. Our family has for 6 generations now gone down and enjoyed the aura and whatever around that stream that flows through our property. If we have to, the rules are that supposedly that we have to fence all waterways. We have areas that are fenced. We've kept the stock out of them. We've now got strips of land that have got grasses 1 metre high, willow trees, rubbish, weeds, goodness knows what. So if the family wants to go down there and have a picnic in the afternoon, we have the choice of sitting on a nice green spot under a willow tree where the sheep have been grazing, enjoying ourselves and watching the kids play in the stream, or we can sit amongst a whole lot of rubbish where we can't even see the stream. So the right to use that water for recreational works both ways. We should be able to have our side of it as well. On to Tank Rule 67, dams and weirs. There's some documents given there about the fact that a crest of a dam should be no more than 4 metres above the ground on the downward side. Now, if we build a dam, and we don't have dams in our country because it's limestone country and they don't hold water, but if we were to, and we build a dam in a relatively steep valley, we're only allowed at 4 metres high on the downstream side. It means that the actual little puddle that you're creating above contains very little water. And there needs to be some look at that, obviously depending on what the catchment area of that valley might be, as to what the size of a dam could be. We go to Schedule 28 and 29, Priority Catchments and Land Use Change. Both these passages referred to the use of a modelling tool known as Overseer, which you've probably become aware of. Now, Overseer was developed as an on-farm tool to help with nutrient planning through fertiliser use. It was not designed as and never was intended to be used as a regulatory tool. It's just one tool to help plan, but it should be never solely dependent upon. We also brings us on to modelling. And there's lots of cases where modelling is used. Generally, it seems to be used in areas where it is difficult or expensive to collect data to make a absolutely definite response or decision on something. The model is there, it should be there as a guide and be there to be looked at and proved correct or otherwise through further research. Now, modelling is often done, as I've said, because it's expensive to do it otherwise. But if a decision is made on modelling and that decision is wrong, the actual expense incurred by the people that it affects can be far greater than what it would have cost to just do the thing right in the first place. As for the Landowners Collective, Schedule 30, having been on that farmer reference group and part of the tank process, well aware was proposed. Our idea was that we had to take ownership of the problem ourselves, that to have a national sort of rule put in place to cover everything was not necessarily going to fix the problem. It might fix one problem in one area, but create more problems in other areas. So we looked at with that in mind, we decided that it was a matter of finding out what the problems were, dealing with the problem as required, and we looked at the further on to that to say that we looked at it more to say the one rule's not going to fix all. Let's find out where the problem is, deal with the problem if one exists, and send the resources to where they're required. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Keep it simple. We added to that, of course, is that Hawke's Bay is one of the sort of greatest microclimates of anywhere in the world. We've got, you add that to the varying topography, the soil types, the aspect of the land, the stream characteristics, rainfall, when it falls, how heavy it falls, and all those things means that every little area can be different, and it needs to be dealt with that in mind. So we came forward our plan, and we're very pleased that it was accepted by the larger tank group, and that the idea has been taken up by other sectors as well. It's imperative that this proposal be accepted and put in place, and it's also important that the format can be modified in the future, because we're doing it for the first time and we don't necessarily know whether we've got it right, but we've made an effort to. One or two other comments I've got just here. Schedule 31, minimum flow of the Raikakaho River has been raised in the document. There was no consultation on this and no reason given, and it probably should be restored back to the original level unless some evidence can be put in front of us. Water permit expiry dates is another issue that doesn't affect us, but I believe affects other people, in the fact that 15 years may not provide the certainty for people to go ahead and put large capital input into irrigation projects, dams, whatever. As a conclusion, the tank catchments really in many parts are pretty modifier environment. Ever since the world evolved and the first plant grew or the first organism came to live, there's been an effect on the globe, on the world. Every animal, every insect, humans of evolution and everything has had an effect on the environment and the globe. So we take Hawke's Bay, we've cleared hills, we've contained the rivers to prevent flooding, covered its surface with roads and towns and cities. We can never expect it to be the pristine environment of 1,000 years ago. In fact, if it wasn't for the fact of erosion, we wouldn't be sitting here discussing this today, because there'd be no Hawke's Bay Plains and no fantastic aquifers that are underneath the Herotona Plains. So we've got to maintain a balance between progress and the care of our environment. it is very important that this is very important that we look at this very closely and do our best to get it right. This document is of great importance, and it needs to be effective and workable for the whole of Hawke's Bay, not just for one particular group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McVie. We'll see if we've got any questions.
Just going on to that minimum flow that you just mentioned, do you know what it was, what it's changed from? Is it,
I can't remember exactly what it is. I think
I think it's 109 litres a second
Yes.
in the plan, if that rings a bell. And there's an allocation of 36 litres a second. How much water do you take out, or is it, I think you mentioned it was just from a spring,
Well, we have, the stream comes in the southern side of the property and exit out the northern side of the property. I haven't got any accurate measurements on what it is, but from some previous sort of very rough measurements we did, we probably add somewhere in the vicinity of 15% to the flow rate as it goes through the farm. The litres per second, where it's measured is the very start of where the stream starts actually going into the aquifer and going underground. And whereas at home in the summer we're probably still on the 70 or 80 litres a second, down at the Maraikako Bridge, of course, at the Maraikako Township, the stream bed is dry.
So the minimum flow site's, I think, it's Tate Road?
Tates Road, yeah.
Where is Tates Road exactly?
It is
Which bridge?
just off Highway 50, probably 4 or 5 k's from Maraikakaho. So it's as the stream exits the valley and starts to come out onto the more onto
So
the
it's,
flat land.
it's by the State Highway 50 bridge, is it?
No, the State Highway 50 bridge is just slightly upstream from the Tate Road bridge.
Okay, thank you.
And how far is that down from your property?
Highway 50 bridge would be 5 kilometres.
Thank you. No further questions from me.
Can I just ask the staff one question? I'd understand the criteria in Rule 67 are all to do with being under the Building Act consent threshold, is that correct? So the 4 metres that Mr McPhee was referring to is, if it's over 4 metres, you've got to get a building consent for the dam, is that correct?
Yes, I was just trying to find the reference in my own plan here, but yeah, I found it before, but yes, it's, I think
Okay,
it's an
thank you.
advice note to just let people know that they also need to look at the Building Act.
Thank you.
Just taking into account that a 4 metre high crest relates to a 12 or 15 metre wide base for a dam. So if we've got a valley coming down and a dam wall there, we end up with quite a small area above.
The difficulty is, Mr McPhee, once you get over that, you need a building consent for your dam.
Yes,
Believe it or not.
But we do, but that could be worked in with what the actual catchment area is above the dam or the size of the dam, that how much water it's holding. Because there's a big difference between a 4 metre wall with 200,000 or 300,000 cubic metres behind it and 20 or 30 cubic metres behind it.
Thank you.
We didn't have any further questions for you. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Mr. Kay, last submitted before lunch. Excuse us, Mr. Kay, I'm just going to stand up and stretch my legs. It's been a while. That gives permission to the older members, or the more experienced members on the opinion to stretch their legs as well.
They did suggest we brought cushions, but we didn't.
We had these lovely cushions and blankets at the marae, and I'm kind of missing them, to be honest.
I won't make the comment on being an age thing.
submission 231. This one. Thank you, Mr. Kay.
Right. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback on the proposed plan. Before I get started, I would like to acknowledge Ivan and Maori, who were tank group members that we spent the last few years on together. My name's Peter Kay. I own a sheep and beef farm in the Kiriri district, 400 hectares, Tirowhenua, and my family have been farming this for over 100 years. We were going to have our 100th anniversary last year, but it was not the year to do that. We had a difficult year. It wasn't just the drought, it was a situation where we had a lot of personal problems out there, but I won't go into that. I've lived in and worked in the primary agricultural sector most of my life, and I've got a pretty good understanding of the industry. I've served with the Hastings District Rural Community Board for 15 years, and I represent the Rural Hawke's Bay on the Coastal Hazards Committee, which is still active. It's a collaborative approach which is trying to map out the future of our coastline and affected areas from Cape Kidnappers to Waipatiki for the next 100 years. I've also am a member of the Tank shareholder group representing sheep and beef farmers. Sheep and beef were latecomers to the Tank process. I think it was about meeting 10 before I was asked to go onto this, to the table. And I quickly realised that the task that I was asked to do was far too big for one person. So with the help of the Regional Council and Beef and Lamb, we organised 2 rounds of meetings throughout the beef and lamb area, 2 in Pātoka, 2 in Sheridan and 2 in Morakako, which covered the majority of the sheep and beef area. The first round was to inform everybody about the proposed plan change and to get feedback. The second round was to update everybody, answer queries that they'd had from the first round, and to find approximately 6 representatives from each area to cover the whole area. Even though the Tank process took 7 years to complete, it's my opinion that it was thorough, collaborative and informative, with many expert presentations to back up the science. The collaborative but is that, from my point of view, 7 years is far too long. But there's another but there as well, and that other but is that this is a new type of process, and I have to commend the Regional Council for being as collaborative as they can. And I think if it was done again, there would be a few changes made. As the sheep and beef representative, I formed a reference group. It comprised of 18 landowners and managers, and this group, with the help of relevant experts, helped compile a land management plan for sheep and beef area of the Tank catchment. I presented this plan to the Tank group, as well as conducting the field day for the Tank group to my local catchment, which I formed during this process. Just to talk a little bit about the field day, it was important, in my view, that all other members of the Tank group were aware of what was actually happening out in the rural area. And it became very clear early on that there was a perception of what was happening out there or what was not happening out there. And when we had this field day, I had 3 members of the Tank group came up to me and said halfway through the afternoon, I did not know that this was happening in the rural area to this extent. This catchment group has over 25% of its area fenced off, and there's some nasty gorges in this area. The riparian planting is probably a minimum of 50, more likely 100 to 150 metres away from waterways. So it's well planted, and it's quite a spectacular catchment. And I felt, being a small catchment, it would be something that we could set as a bit of a standard and aspire to. The fenced off areas in these catchments, they haven't been done in the last 10 years. They were done 50 years ago. My grandfather put some around my property. Now, he didn't do it for water quality. They didn't want it, they were getting sick of cattle beasts falling over banks and killing themselves. But as it's turned out, with all this fencing, it's been a dual purpose way of getting around. So it's achieved two purposes. One, it keeps stock away, but two, the water quality is able to be kept up high. With regards to the reference group, it took a couple of meetings for the reference group to get their head around what they were expected to do. And so one of the things, or there were three things that came out immediately. One was they wanted to keep it simple, which wasn't particularly easy, but we gave it a go. The second one was we must learn from the mistakes of Plan Change 6 in the Ruataniwha. Plan Change 6 is not as flexible as this plan's going to be. And we wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be, this is not going to be a plan that fits all, a rule that fits all. So, so that was quite important. And the third point was all rules and policies should be outcome focused and based on science data, not modelling. It was quite clear from the reference group that they didn't believe a lot of the modelling that the Regional Council came up with initially, but they did understand that there is a standard that's been set, and it's up to us to measure get a history of measurement ahead of ourselves so that we can prove these models wrong or prove them right. For example, my catchment's been measuring water at the bottom of our catchment for the last nearly 3 years now, and we can quite confidently say over that period of time that no, we don't have a phosphorus or we don't have a nitrogen problem leaving this catchment. If we did, we would be going upstream to find out where it is. So,
Mr. Kay,
Yes.
just pausing there, we've read your submission, and I just see you're going through your submission sequentially. So I'm just wondering for this next part, if you're able to just point us to those most relevant matters, those matters that you think are really, really important to your submission, understanding that we have read it, and that might be particularly to those parts that you're particularly aggrieved with or opposing or recommending some particular change.
most of the points from now on have been mentioned today, actually.
Yes. Yeah, you would have heard that, hence my correction.
So there was, one was catchment community initiatives.
Yes.
You've seen my writing there that I view them as being aspirational. I agree with that. Policy 21, I noticed that there has been some changes since this submission was written, so I support the council proposal as part of section 42. The 10 hectares has been mentioned. I would suggest that where land change restrictions only apply where change is greater than 20 hectares or 10% of the property, whichever is the greatest. You did talk about the minimum flows of the Murakaka and Pokawa streams earlier on, and I can't find any clear reason or explanation why this has been done. So I would not, I don't agree with that being changed. Policy 25, I agree in part. Policy 27, support with amendments. A point on that is, I don't think anybody would disagree about the stock exclusion milestones that we need to meet. But there's also another one on the output to be reported on for nutrient management. With these catchment collectives, it may not be necessary. For example, if the catchment testing results show no excess of any particular nutrient leaving the catchment plan, we don't need to report on it as such. But if there's a problem, it's up to the group to isolate it and remedy it. This may involve a further need for a nutrient plan on an individual property, but not before. Policy 34, I agree with, but unfortunately it's not happening. There have been a number of changes and without the stakeholder input. Policy 49, it's not my intention to comment on water allocation on the plains, but you've heard lots of expert reports on that subject, except to say that 15 years is too short a time for consent durations. I've got a note here to say, I think Marlborough was used as an example earlier on this morning about having a 30-year consent duration.
That's correct.
And one water system near me, which I know about, is budgeting on a 22 to 25-year period to recoup its expenditure. Policy 59, I agree in part. I recognise that it's essential that we use water available at high flow times, but I do have concerns about the exclusivity of the rules, particularly C1, which mentions a fund contribution of no more explanation. C3 says the contribution is proportional to any commercial returns. I would find it very hard to define commercial return, define commercial returns. However, the straight 20% allocation reserved for iwi for Maori land development or not, I do agree with, and it was discussed during the tank process. Tank 1 and 5, I support with amendments. There are 3 catchment groups already recording. I was instrumental in setting up these groups along with the Regional Council and Beef and Lamb. In the course of doing this, there has been a question already raised about who owns the information that we will be collecting from these catchments. The catchment does, of course, but some of the data may be sensitive and they may not want it to be shared with other catchments because of the commercial sensitivity. There needs to be a comprehensive list of requirements by the Regional Council, and I seek that data that is retained as property of the catchment collective and as such cannot be shared without the permission of the collective. The land management plan that was recommended by Beef and Lamb, the Sheep and Beef Reference Group, and subsequently adopted by the Tank Group has formed the basis of much of this plan, certainly in the sheep and beef area which I represent. I seek that this is to be retained with amendments, and there are areas of this plan that need fine-tuning, and some have already been done, some of which I've mentioned, some more which you've heard of, and I concur with their comments in the support of this plan to enable the plan to be developed by the farmer or collective, delete requirements to have a plan prepared by an expert, enable flexibility in farm systems, management practices, mitigation in order to address environmental concerns, while continuing to support the resilience, vibrancy and profitability of the farming business, and also to ensure the plan is underpinned by robust soil conservation principles. You've just talked about the Rule 7 with the cubic metres, 20 cubic metres per day. I have an example in my district where there is a water system that comes from a spring. It feeds 4 properties in a lifestyle block with 2 houses, approximately 8,000 stock units. If you add all those together, assuming that a sheep drinks 10 litres of water a day in the summer and a cattle beast 45, you're looking at over 80 or 90,000 litres of water per day. it just changes things from a 20 cubic metre perspective. And so we're just asking that it's not changed at all. Rule Tank 67, I agree in part. Water storage is relevant in the sheep and beef area, perhaps not so much in our area as it is on the plains. And I'd like to just comment again on that bank of the dam size. We're talking about 4 metres. I have 43 dams on my 400 hectares. There would be 6 of them have been fenced off. There would be probably, those 6 would have banks that would be more than 4 metres high. But once you get off the plains and get into a little bit steeper country, 4 metres on the bottom side of a dam may only create a dam, a quantity of water that is only a metre or 2 metres deep. There are plenty of rules without that exception already set in place on how much water can be held behind a bank of a dam. I'm suggesting that perhaps it could be 6 metres before we need to get a building permit to lift that up. And in fact, I remember during the tank process, someone asked for what's a definition of a dam. My reply to that is, it's a sediment and nutrient trap with recreational potential. In conclusion, there needs to be a degree of flexibility which other plans have lacked. And as we discussed during the tank process, there needs to be a balance which allows room for improvement. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Kane.
Thank you.
We'll see if we've got any questions for you.
I've got one question about that policy 59C regarding which you raised about contribution of funds. Would that, you're involved in some of the tank processes. Was that raised at all to your knowledge?
Raising funds?
Yes. Was it discussed as an issue, or is that?
No, not as such, I don't recall. Just to give you an idea of what's happening, what we're doing at the moment, in my area, which is the southwestern area of the tank catchment, I have, I'm on one side of the road where my property is the tank catchment. On the other side of the road is the Guavas Forest, which is the northwest side, corner of the Ruataniwha catchment. John McPhee, who's just presented, has organised his catchment, which is the Murakako stream. We're now in the process of getting 2 more catchments, one between the 2 of us and one further towards the ranges. One of the problems that we have is each catchment doesn't have enough members or contributors to be financially viable to have their own facilitator or whatever. So what we're planning on doing is each group will maintain their own catchment, but they will operate under an umbrella. So there is a larger number of us so that we can share the costs. Also, by doing this, what we're doing is we're dropping the numbers of catchments that the regional council are going to have to look after or be accountable for. Because if we have 50 catchments around the tank process, they're going to be pulling their hair out in a very short time. Does that answer your question?
Yep, that's good. So there's nothing restricting you from merging catchment collectives together into?
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. But the recording and the measurements will be done at the bottom of each catchment, however small it will be, because you need to do that. Otherwise, you're not going to be isolating a problem if a problem did occur.
Thank you.
Mr. Kay, if you had an opportunity to have a look at in your evidence you referred to Schedule 29, and the old version of Schedule 29 had some quite specific numbers about nitrogen leaching on different soil types in different areas. That's all been crossed out and being replaced by a more generic approach. Are you referring to the old version of Schedule 29 or the updated one?
I would be referring to the old one. I'm probably blaming myself more than anything. The common answer is, if I wanted to find it, I can find it on the website. I don't regard myself as being particularly computer literate, and if I can go and find it, I will eventually find it, but I've got to nearly take half a day's work.
It's fair to say the new version's also had quite some criticism in front of us, so.
Right.
But it's,
I can't comment on that, sorry, because I don't know what it is.
We don't have any further questions for you, Mr.
Oh,
King. Thank you very much for coming in. We're going to break for lunch. We're about 20 minutes past, so we'll look to, is 10 past what? 10 past 2, okay? 10 past 2 is okay with you?
Whatever's okay.
Okay, we'll come back at, starting again at 10 minutes past 2. Thank you.